Hari Om, everyone. Welcome back to Lalita-Sahasra-Nama. We'll begin with the invocation verses. Sindhuraruna vigraham trinayanam manikyamaulispurat Taranayakashekaram smitamukhim navakshoruham Pandimbhyam adipurnaratnachashakam raktotpalam bibratim Saumyam ratnagatastaraktacharanam dhyayet paramambikam Dhyayet padmasanastham vikasitavadanam padmapatrayatakshim Hemabham pitavastram karakalitalasadhima padmam varangim sarvalankarayuktam satatamabhayatam bhaktanamram bhavanim Shri Vidyam Shantamurtim Sakalasudanutam sarvasampatpradatrim Sakunkumavilepanamalikachumvikasturikam Samandahasite kshanam sasharachapapashankusham Ashishajanamohini marunamalya bhusham varam Japakusumabhasuram japavidhau smaredambikam Arunam karunatarangitakshim dhritapashankushapushpabanachapam Animadibhiravritam mayukaihi ahamityeva vibhavaye bhavanim. Last time we had a long session on the 64 arts, the Chatushashti Kala, and how these arts, such as music, singing, various kinds of aesthetic arts, but also practical tools, oriented arts, activities, how these can be used as expressions of Devi. The next name, Maha Chatushashti Koti Yogini Ganasevita. She is attended to by 64 crores, so 640 million different yoginis. It's a very interesting one because according to the Agamas, there are 64 yoginis. These are very specific beings, each of them a goddess in her own right. And I've mentioned before that there are temples in India dedicated to these. But here the name says that she's attended to by 64 crores of yoginis. This is because each of these yoginis represents a whole plethora of yoginis, of feminine powers, so to speak. And in the Agama traditions, this attention towards the feminine power, Shakti, is really the distinguishing mark. If you look at other Dharma traditions, this is not so much present as it is in the Agama traditions, honoring the power of the female. Not only honoring, but in some sense, taking refuge in that there is some great energy in the female, in the feminine, which is not present in ordinary people, especially not in men. One of the famous Agama texts says that Shiva Shaktya Yukto Yadi Bhavati Shakta Prabhavitum Nache Devam Devo Nakalu Kushala Spanditumapi. That only when Shiva is joined with Shakti is he capable of doing anything. Otherwise, he is totally incapable and he is just like a corpse. He is incapable of doing anything. It is Shakti which energizes Shiva. So most of these things are known to you, of course, but here there's special attention to the yoginis. Devi is the Manu Vidya. Manu Vidya is a particular variant of the Sri Vidya and refers to a specific lineage within the Sri Vidya tradition, a specific lineage of the mantras that was handed down. So you can understand this in a way like some of you have gone to Oxford, some of you have gone to Cambridge, or some of you have gone to different schools or colleges. And at each college, the same subject is taught, but there is sort of a slightly different lineage of teachers, maybe a different twist to it. So for example, there are two different lineages. One is known as that of Lopamudra, and one is known as that of Agastya. And the one of Lopamudra, it has a much softer touch to it, whereas the one of Agastya is quite fierceful, not fierceful, but is quite intense, we could say. So this is similar in these traditions. Even the effect of the mantras can be a little different according to the lineage. It's very, very interesting. You have to get to know these things very deeply so that you can appreciate this. So she is the Manu Vidya, which is one of these lineages. One of 12, I should have said. There are 12 different lineages. There is the Manu lineage, the Chandra lineage, the Kubera, the Lopamudra, Agastya, the Manmatha lineage, Agni lineage, Surya lineage, Indra, Skanda, Shiva, and then Durvasa. These are the 12 lineages of Sri Vidya. And if I'm not mistaken, forgive me if I'm wrong, only 3 of these are still in existence. Because you see, as all things in samsara, things arise and then they perish in the sense that the lineage is broken. So I believe only 3 of them still remain. The Lopamudra, Agastya, and Durvasa, these 3. Then she is the Chandra Vidya, which is one of these other lineages, the Vidya related to the moon. And then a very important name, Chandra Mandala Madhyaka. She resides in the mandala of the moon. This does not refer to the external moon, although there are Sri Vidya practices where we gaze at the external moon while doing our practice. And that is quite interesting. It has a very cooling effect on the mind. Those of you who have access to the moon, in the sense that you can actually see the moon when it is full moon, you can try that sometime, that you sit and you gaze at the moon and simultaneously watch your mind. There's some special activity going on. The moon is related to our pranas. So when the moon is full, certain prana activities are more quickly successful than when the moon is empty, meaning when we see the new moon. That is why the point of full moon and the point of new moon have been used since time immemorial for rituals across the world, not only in Hindu Dharma. Across the world, you will see that the new moon and the full moon are very specific, special moments. And this is in fact related to the pranas, that when the moon is not visible, meaning when it is new moon, then the prana is at the lowest point, and when the full moon is visible, the prana is at the highest point, sort of naturally. Of course, it also happens through the yogic kriyas, the yogic practices, but that happens in some sense naturally through the presence of the moon and the visibility of the moonlight. But here, the name that she abides in the center of the moon mandala refers to something very specific. I've told you already many times that the Agama traditions have an outer, an inner, and an innermost aspect. This is related to the inner aspect. There is in our energy body, our subtle body, there is a point within the uppermost chakra where we say there is a kind of moon there. And this is symbolic. It is in fact the source of nectar. And when through very specific yogic practices, Sri Vidya practices as well, when the fire in the belly, in the Nabhi area, the inner subtle fire, when that is brought to blaze, becoming hotter and hotter through very specific practices, then this inner fire blazes all the way up, and that moon nectar begins to melt. And this is experienced as a spiritual experience. It's not just imagination. It really is, it really happens. So one suddenly feels a tremendous heat in the body. This is what is commonly known as Kundalini, but it is not actually Kundalini. It is Kundalini, but it's related to Kundalini. But Kundalini itself is something even more than that. This is sort of a pre-stage of that. But a lot of people who do glimpse this, they automatically think this is Kundalini, when they feel heat in the body and such things. But actually this is the fire that is generated through the yogic and agamic practices, and then brings the Chandra Mandala to melt. And then the nectar drips down and suffuses the entire body with bliss. And this is what the text is describing here. In the Shiva Purana, there is a shloka where Shiva says that, where Devi says that she resides in the flame of fire and Shiva is in the moon. And when the fire melts the moon, then the two merge together. But here it is opposite. Here she abides in the Chandramandala. She is Charurupa. Her body is, her nature, her form, her appearance is gentle, beautiful, sweet, all the most lovely qualities you can imagine. And as I always remind you, this is not only meant as an external object of visualization, but this really refers to the inner experiences. We are quite a small group here, so I think it is all right to speak about such experiences, that with the yogic practices, really, these things are not imagination. They are not just poetic or metaphorical. It is really so that when we engage in these practices, our subtle body is suffused with a very subtle kind of bliss. And this becomes more and more intense, and is in fact the reason why you then find these poetic descriptions of Devi and of the divinities. It is not just the fantasy or romantic imagination of a poet. You see, these are based on very specific experiences, and these experiences are then expressed in the form of poetry, or in the form of dance, or in the form of aesthetics. Which is why the 64 arts are in fact mostly related to aesthetics. So when you practice this tradition and you get a taste of the bliss, you begin to understand why she has always been described in these terms. You see, you recognize certain things. Like, I'll give you an example, the blissful flow of nectar. Now, for someone who has not experienced or tasted this, the expression, the blissful flow of nectar sort of sounds like poetry, isn't it? It gives off the sense of this must be something poetic, and the poet is using a certain poetic device. But when you have experienced that this occurs through specific practices, you can actually appreciate the poetry much, much more, because you know with great delight that the person who wrote it was experiencing it. You see? And remember also what I had explained a few sessions ago about the 3 types of meditation. The outer one, which is called Sthula, the coarse one, that is when we visualize the deity. The inner one, which is the energetic experience, which I have just alluded to, and then the innermost one, which is the state of absolute consciousness or awareness, which is known as para. So there is the stula, the sukshma, and the para. And this trifold division is adhered to in all the Agama traditions, from India all the way to Tibet. It is always this trifold division. So whenever you see the deities being described, remember that the adherents of these traditions are not looking at the deity as an outer form, actually. That is just the coarse aspect. They are really more interested in the inner, and even more in the innermost. Please always keep this in mind. This is not our invention or our scholarly interpretation. This is really right there in the scriptures. So please always keep it in mind. She has a beautiful smile. The same word, charu, beautiful, gentle, sweet. It is blissful to encounter her. And she wears the beautiful crescent moon, the Chandrakala. As you can see in the picture, maybe not so well, you can see she's wearing the crescent moon, the moon on the day of Ashtami, on the 8th day of the lunar calendar. And there are many different significances to this. One is that, and I'm terrible at mathematics, but there is some ratio between the distance of the moon to the earth on that day in relation to some other astronomical figure. Now forgive me for not being able to give this to you properly, but there is some ratio, and that is why this Ashtami Chandra is so particular. The moon that is neither full nor empty. You see, so it expresses the middle between the extremes. She's always in the middle between the extremes. She's not only full and not only empty, but in fact both and neither. She is the queen of the moving and unmoving beings. All beings are experienced within the space of consciousness. Whenever the scriptures make these statements about the deities being the queen or being the ruler or being the king, the lord, it is always meant from that absolute perspective, that without the energy of consciousness, without the power of consciousness being present, there would be no experience of beings. Neither would I experience you as beings, nor would you as beings experience anyone else or me. So it is the power of consciousness, Chitti Shakti, that makes experience possible. Sarvanubhuhu, the Upanishad says, that it is the experiencer, it is that which lends experience. Shankaracharya says, Sarvesham Bhutanam, I believe, Sarvesham Bhutanam Chetayita, that which lends consciousness to beings, is the ultimate Chitti Shakti, the energy of consciousness. So whenever these statements are made about the deity being the queen or the lord, remember it is meant in this sense, not so much in the Christian sense, where you see Jesus is the Lord or God is the Lord. Here it is meant in a different way. That's why also I tend not to use the word Lord when we translate, because it is meant in the sense of the ultimate, that which lends its light to everything, and therefore things exist and things are experienced, is indeed in some way the king or the queen. The king of chakras, the Shri Chakra, is her sign, is her symbol, and it is also her abode. I've promised you time and again that we will talk more about the Shri Chakra once we get to the close of the Sahasranama. You can see the Sahasranama as an entry point, and then we will go into deeper texts if you are still alive or if I'm still alive, and if you are still interested actually, which is more important than being alive, then we can go into deeper texts such as Saundarya Lahari, where the Sri Chakra is addressed in greater depth. And then if you are still interested, we can go into the Navavarana Puja, into the 9-layer puja, which then is really entering Sri Vidya as an actual practice. But this takes time and one has to earn it, you see. It is in some way a very aristocratic tradition. She is Raja Rajeshwari. She is the queen over the kings of kings. So she is a very majestic, aristocratic lady, and hence one has to earn the possibility to meet her. And then, of course, she is Parvati. Parvati, the daughter of Parvata. Parvata is Himavan, Himalaya. She is the daughter of the Himalaya. This refers to her birth as Uma. Most of you will know the story of how Sati, the previous incarnation of Devi, desired Shiva as her husband, and with Shiva's agreement, finally married him or wanted to marry him, and then her own father mocked Shiva for his appearance, for being a beggar, for having no status. And then in her fury, Sati brought forth the inner fire, but it consumed her from within. And she was then reborn as Uma, the daughter of Parvata, the daughter of the Himalaya. And the Kumara Sambhava describes beautifully, in such beauty that one almost feels that Kalidasa, who wrote it, was actually a yogi, not just a poet. It's in the incredible description. It is so deep. Describes how Uma then approaches Shiva, who is so deeply engrossed in his sadhana, who has completely given up any interest in love. She approaches him, and with the help of Kamadeva, who shoots an arrow at that moment, Shiva's attention is brought back to Uma, and her face is... And then all these descriptions from the Sahasranama apply at that moment when he sees her face. And the Kumara Sambhava says that his samadhi wavered, his absolute concentration wavered like the ocean wavers with the rising of the moon when the tide comes. So it's an incredible poetry. If you know Sanskrit, it's we say Roma harshascha jayate. We say our hairs stand on end when we see that poetry. Or another example of that poetry is that when Uma is then ready to be wedded to Shiva, her attendants, Parvati's attendants, they apply kajal on her eyes, and then Kalidasa says, but not to make her more beautiful, but to highlight that which is already beautiful. I can't put it in English, so it is just incredible. Of course, we're not studying Kalidasa now. I much appreciate that. Of course, we're studying the Sahasranama, but telling you the brief story of Sati and Parvati reminded me of the Kumara Sambhava. Then she's Padmanayana. She has lotus eyes. It's a very common description found in ancient Indian literature. What is the symbolism of the lotus? Many people speak about lotuses and lotus eyes, but have actually never seen a lotus. Fortunately, in Switzerland in the summer, we do have lotuses, and it is wonderful to see how the lotus, in fact, mostly emerges in a kind of swampy water, not in very clean, clear water. You don't really find lotuses in very clean, clear waters like a mountain lake. No, you find it more in swampy waters. But then, as it emerges, it is absolutely perfect. It is untainted by those swampy waters. So that is the symbolism of the lotus, that untainted by any troubles, by any sufferings, by any faults, any imperfections, the lotus of our true nature blooms and flourishes, untainted by samsara. And she's lotus-eyed because her eyes have that innocence, that absolute innocence that is simply untouched and never brought into any kind of samsaric trouble or dimension. And her appearance is like that of the Padmaraga, which is the ruby. We had that also earlier, a similar explanation that her radiance is like that of the ruby. The color red, as you know, is very important in the Sri Vidya tradition because it is connected with Devi herself. It symbolizes her quality. Also the coral, I have a coral mala. This is closely related to her. So if one practices her sadhanas, then it is auspicious to use a mala like this. If you have a ruby mala, then of course nothing like it. But I have heard that they tend to be a little expensive. And coral too has become quite expensive actually. So there are other variants of course, but these are the auspicious ones. Then she sits on Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, Ishvara and Sadashiva. They form the seat of, you can see outlined here, you can see it. This expresses, of course, that all the supreme deities of all the traditions are like the pillars that carry her. They're like the palanquin bearers, so to speak, of the Divine Mother. And there are inner meanings of these, which you will learn at a later point. And she takes the form of the 5 forms of Shiva, which are Ishana, Tatpurusha, Aghora, Vamadeva and Sadyojata. And it is from these 5 forms of Shiva, or the 5 faces also of Shiva, that the 4 Vedas and the Agamas emerged. Different scriptures give different categories. The important point being that all the scriptures emerged from his faces. This is similar to the Buddhist Manjushri Kumara, who is also a deity that is the source of scriptures. And in Manjushri Kumara's explanations, they also say that the different scriptures, the Vedas, the Agamas, the Buddhist scriptures, they all emerged from his face. So this is a very similar notion here. And the text says that she is of the nature of these 5 Shivas. So she assumes their form, or she manifests as them. And then we have one of the most important names of the whole Sahasranama, Chinmayi. She consists of Chit, or she is made of Chit. She is constituted of Chit. Chit can be translated as consciousness or awareness. And this word is so overused these days. One finds it everywhere. So much so that I feel people are using it too lightly, and we need to find a new word for it. But so far I haven't found it. If there are some linguists among you, we should talk What is meant by Chit? I'll try to guide you through the process of recognizing Chit, recognizing consciousness. And this is a little meditative and is meant to be so. When you hear something, for example, the sound of a bird, what is it that apprehends the sound? What is it that knows the sound? It is your faculty of hearing, your organ of hearing, and that transmits this sensory input, this information, to the mind. Scientists would perhaps say the brain. Doesn't matter, it's the same thing. The brain is the physical form of the mind, the physical vehicle. So that which knows is the mind, Chitta. And the knowing, the being aware of things is called Cetana. To be aware. I'm aware of the room. I'm aware of the emotions in me. I'm aware of the thoughts in me. I'm aware of things happening, of time somehow flowing, of somehow being in this body. That which is aware, moment to moment, knowing all these things, all these little experiences, knowing them moment to moment. It's like pulsating. If you observe the flow of your experience, it is like pulsating in little interim moments. And that which is aware of all these is awareness or consciousness, Chit. So to know Chit, you have to go through this procedure. First you take an object, you become attentive to how you are knowing that object. Then you can look at your inner experiences, thoughts, emotions, and become attentive to the fact that you are knowing these. And then you can gently pay attention to the knowing itself, just the awareness itself. That is Chit. And she is Chinmayi, she consists of that. That is actually her substance, so to speak. That is what she's made of. So she's not a form. She's not a human being as depicted here in a picture. But she is this awareness, this consciousness, just being conscious. That is what she is. Now the great yogis, the Buddha, the great masters, meditators, tell us that this consciousness itself is actually undying. It is actually not subject to the death of the body. No doubt the body dies. No doubt thoughts die. All the time. What I was thinking 5 minutes ago is no longer here. What will be thought in 5 minutes is not yet here and will be gone once it has arrived. So thoughts are very, very, very temporary. But even the thinking process will die when the brain dies, when the body dies. But this pure knowing, as described, this consciousness that knows moment to moment, does not die. That is what the great yogis say. And that is really her nature. That is what she is. Hence her name is Chinmayi. And then she is, of course, Paramananda. She is the supreme bliss, the supreme joy, the supreme delight. It is difficult to encapsulate in words even the delight we experience when we have fallen freshly in love, or when our child is born, or when our child is happy. It is difficult to describe in words the joy we experience at the height of success. Imagine you've worked towards a goal, and then there is your celebration. Finally you've reached it, and that moment of celebration, that feeling of delight and joy, that itself is difficult to put into words. Our good friend Jamin and Chantal just got engaged yesterday. So the joy radiating from them, the joyous feeling, that cannot be put into words. But that joy is still only a semblance, it's still only a reflection or a minor expression of the joy that she is, and of the delight experienced in the depth of the yogic process. When the fire that I have mentioned in the subtle body, when that is activated through the right practice, through the proper practice, and when it melts the Chandramandala and the nectar begins to flow, there is such an exhilaration, such a suffusing of the body with delight and joy, that one has the sense there is nothing greater. Nothing, no experience in this samsara, no experience in this universe is equivalent to that. But now, very important, the purpose in the Sri Vidya tradition and all Agama traditions is not to crave for the bliss in itself. Gaudapada Acharya, the Parama Guru of Shankaracharya, said, Na svadayet sukham tatra. One should not relish the bliss that is found there. Patanjali, the great yoga master, says that one must have even vairagya. Vairagya means a sense of detachment towards the highest states. So don't think we are after bliss. We want bliss, we want bliss, we want bliss. No, not at all. It is in fact that it is a fact that the bliss is there, but it is there by nature and spontaneously. It is not there because we are craving for it and we are hankering after it. Only that kind of bliss, sahajananda, the natural bliss, is Paramananda, is the supreme bliss. Any other kind of bliss is a powerful state of mind, perhaps a state of prana through the yogic practices, but is not the highest. So you see, when you're experiencing a powerful, joyful state, be careful, because when you're craving, oh, now I got it, then you've already lost it. That is the mystery. So don't think ever in this way of, I want bliss. You will never find it. Very important to understand. Moreover, in the deeper levels of practice, the bliss we experience is in fact the fuel for our awareness, for our recognition of awareness. This is a little difficult to understand for those who have only just started, but with time you will understand this, that awareness is always there, of course, it's always experiencing, but it requires a certain fuel to be recognized. For instance, powerful experience, a strong experience, coupled with the recognition of awareness, of the nature of awareness, in fact strengthens that recognition, makes it blaze. Similarly, the experience of Paramananda, the experience of bliss, makes the recognition of awareness blaze. If you haven't understood this, please don't worry. It is something you will understand with time, with practice. So now let us go to the meditation, which is based on the agamas of Sri Vidya. Please relax. From within the deepest expression of your own consciousness that is present moment to moment, you see the ocean of nectar, Sudha Sindhu. The ocean of nectar is a boundless, infinite expanse, white in color. It is like milk. In all the directions of space, it has no boundary. And within the milky expanse, there are also very softly all the colors. It is like the rainbow colors are present. And in the very center of this infinite expanse, the nectar ocean, there is the island of jewels, living jewels, wish-fulfilling jewels. And in the center of the island, there is the forest of wish-fulfilling kadamba flowers, hibiscus flowers. And in the center of the kadamba vana, is a beautiful lake filled with lotuses. The center of this lake is the palace of Lalita-Tripura-Sundari, and this palace is the Sri Chakra. It has 4 gateways, 4 entry points, and 9 layers within. 9 layers to pass through. And in each of these are powerful yoginis, powerful goddesses, filled with Shakti and very specific qualities. Some are related to insight, some are related to courage, some are related to contentment, different qualities. And you honor all these yoginis, but you pass by them. You do not remain attached to them. And you go through all the 9 layers until you reach the innermost, which is now the center point of your entire being. And here you find, seated upon Paramashiva, the Supreme Shiva, absolute reality, Lalita-Tripurasundari, she's radiating the rosy light of the early morning sun. She holds a sugarcane bow, 5 arrows made of flowers in the other hand, a noose in one more hand, and a hook in one more hand. The noose represents desire and bliss. The hook represents aversion and clarity. And as you visualize her, from her side glance, Abhanga, radiate waves upon waves of karuna, compassion for all beings. She is the fountain of compassion. Her compassion is unimpeded, is always flowing. And you are the recipient of that compassion. Drawing you to wisdom, to liberation. And then the entire Sri Chakra, the island of jewels, the ocean of nectar, dissolve into pure consciousness, your own pure consciousness, and you just rest. This is the way to meditate in the Sri Vidya tradition. It's very important to know that she emerges from your own consciousness, and once the visualization is complete, this is called the Nishpanna Krama, then it also dissolves into your consciousness. Very important to understand this. So now if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. You can also write into the chat. In this case, we wish everyone a wonderful rest of the week. Please enjoy all the sense experiences, all of these playful experiences as expressions of Lalita Devi's own nature. Don't separate it from her, don't separate it from your own true nature, and then everything is much more joyful. Hari Om.